Stories of Ikigai. Are you good at what you do? Do you love what you're doing? Are you serving a need? And do you feel rewarded? In this podcast, you'll hear how others discover their Ikigai with the hope that it'll help you discover yours. Hi, I'm Mika Domingo, and this is Stories of Ikigai. I'm excited and honored to have on the show my friend Brian Enright, sculptor and designer from Oakland, California. Brian's mission is to create works of art that inspire value and hope for individuals, communities, and future generations, educating us about the beneficial impact of working with reclaimed materials. All of our actions are interconnected and vital to our survival on this planet. Awakening as many people as possible to this reality is, therefore, increasingly important. By utilizing objects that would otherwise be discarded in landfill or forgotten places, Brian sheds light on the hidden potential of our refuse to literally take on a second life. He seeks to educate through his work on how better product design can and will eventually eliminate the end of lifespan for many man made objects, an indispensable step in creating a sustainable environment worldwide for generations to come. Brian Enright and his art clearly demonstrate the simple changes in our thinking can affect positive changes in our culture and environment. Welcome to the show, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Mika. It's great to be here.
Before we talk specifically about your incredible work and its impact on our community, walk us through how you first discovered your passion for art.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's non-linear how I kind of landed in my career um, of being a sculptor and doing this full time. But I've always been passionate about art. Um, my mom was a dance instructor. I was really into dancing when I was younger and still am, but I knew about um, and had really experienced what it is to be creative. And as I was in college, when I was in college, I was studying. I was pre med, and I was studying human computer interaction, and cognitive science was my major. Um, and you know but I was always interested in being creative, whether that was through music or just making some little thing here or there. And I had in high school I had taken kind of 3 years of wood shop, and so I knew that I was like good with my hands. I could make things, and I enjoyed that a lot. But at the time I totally didn't think that was I was learning things for my career at the time, right? Um, and so as I graduated college, I went and I worked at a usability research firm in San Francisco, a small firm that was it was really cool people. Um, it was exciting, but there was something that was just missing for me. Like I kind of learned all the things that were interesting to me in the first like half year, and
What
then
were
I was
you
like,
doing? What were some of the projects at that usability firm?
yeah, well, we were giving design and redesign recommendations
I
for
see.
websites and software based on our research. And so we were a consultancy that gave recommendations. So, you know, that could be everything from working with Greenpeace to working with like Princess Cruises, right? So like all over the map. Um,
I see.
and but again, it was like we were giving recommendations often to like web design teams, that those may or may not be implemented, right? So for me, I was all about building and creating things, and instead I was giving, it's like I'd give recommendations that might not even happen, right? So like I
Yeah.
wasn't there's a there's something about when you see like your ideas actualized into the world, right? And that obviously was very important for me, and I felt was missing. And I didn't want to go back to school at the time to become a web designer. I knew a little of web design at the time, but um, I was also in that moment. I was reading a book called Cradle to Cradle, and that book, this was back in like 2005, and that book was like reading my own thoughts, the things I was really concerned about and interested in, looking at the world around us. um, I just saw all these things that were just going under our feet. They weren't like going away. We there And that's kind of what this book talked about. It's an idea of the circular economy, and that there is no cradle to grave, it's all cradle to cradle. It's like, how do we build in a way that um, we're thinking of the end of something's lifespan at the start of its design. And that really intrigued me, and I felt was important. And I didn't see how my job at the time was doing anything positive for that, right? We weren't necessarily doing anything bad,
Hmm.
but we weren't making any change in the ways that I wanted to. So I I left my job. I actually went out to Alaska right after I left my job, to a small town at the end of a 66-mile dirt road. And I was surrounded by people who reuse wasn't even really like a term. It was just how everyone lived, right?
Wow.
There's a cost to bring everything down the road, and there's a cost to take it out. And so if anything has utility or value, like it's going to stick around. And metal was often one of those things, right? Like metal will last for a while. You
Yes.
can store it outside or whatever and still use it. And so I kind of, it really continued to stoke that part of my that part of myself, and my like philosophy, or like what I was really interested in learning.
And was
And
this
so
shortly after you worked for the firm in the Bay Area? You went to Alaska. Was this where you were commissioned to work on this historic artifact? Uh, I think it was a fence that you created that went around the park. I saw a picture of it.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. When I first went there, I went there initially like kind of to just hang with a friend of mine and experience Alaska. But the night I got there, I was hired as a guide, to kind of be an assistant guide, just because I had had mountaineering experience, and we were doing just some very light mountaineering. But I ended up returning there for 5 years, and continued working as a guide there. Um, it's a little bit of another story, because I still want to answer your first question, but I did end up coming back there after that, um, in 2014 and 2015, and I worked on a project that was, I was asked to design, build, and oversee the construction of a community park, outdoor music venue, and playground built out of historic mining artifacts from this historic mining town itself. So it was really a huge honor, um, and it's still my biggest piece. Um, and yeah, I'm really proud of it. And we can definitely talk more about that, um, and maybe show a
Absolutely.
photo of it too.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. For our listeners, I'm sure they're interested in seeing the kinds of work you've done so far, and
Yeah.
they're incredible work. And I had the well, I'll let you continue, and then I do want to talk about your show, Neither Created Nor Destroyed. But go
Cool.
ahead and continue with the answering the previous question.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll cut to the chase there, but basically, like when I came back from Alaska, I went and took a class in metalwork, and I had a project that I had never worked in metal before, but like I said, I felt like what I was looking to do was not too complicated. Um, and so I went into that class and I learned a lot. And I kind of switched gears. I was doing something. It wasn't complicated, but it was really big, and it was working with car chassis. And so because I didn't have something bigger than a car, to carry it around and just bring it from a junkyard, and didn't know how to do any of that stuff at the time, I switched gears and I made a table. I made a couple different tables, and one of those tables, which is built out of a structural I-beam, like a remnant piece of I-beam.
Wow.
Uh, uh, there was a woman in the class who was, she was a 76-year-old ex-statistics professor from Cal who happened to be in my class. And she was like, when you're done with that, I will buy that from you. And
Awesome.
that was just like this incredible um, encouragement and shock to be like, whoa, this is the first thing I've ever built in metal, and this person likes it and wants it. And when I told her my story, she said, oh, you found what you're supposed to do. Like, if this is the first thing you've ever built in metal, like, you're like, keep doing it. And so that encouragement really just really helped me to stick with it. And it was one of those like signs from the universe, right? It's like, okay, you're in the right
You're
place, you're doing the
yes,
right
keep doing
thing. And
it. Yeah.
even though it was super frightening, right? Like, I was walking into totally uncharted waters in my life, but I was 25. So I was like, I know that the job that I had been in and that environment was not um it wasn't the path of me thriving. Like, I could physically, tangibly feel that. And um, so I was just like, I'm gonna do this thing. And yeah, that was how I got into um, to making things. Um,
And it was functional.
it was
She
functional to
wanted to
start.
use it. She wanted to buy it,
Yeah, and that
and
was part of. Sorry, that was part of the thing. Was like, I had always been told growing up to not become an artist, um, or a musician.
discouraged by
It
family or
Yeah, yep, yep. Because it's like, you know, all all kinds of reasons, right? You can have all the talent in the world and not make any money, right? So, um, but I so with that, I started out by making functional things for the
Mhm.
first few years, and just really learning metal and learning that craft, right? And learning it, whether it was large scale fabrication or whether it was working with jewelry. Like, I just wanted to learn, how did metal work? How could I manipulate this new substance that is so it has so many cool properties. You can do so much with it. Um, and so it took me a couple of years, but then I put on my first art show, which was a group show in 2008 and 9, and made some artwork and some functional stuff in there. But yeah, the
and
goal was always towards sculpture.
you featured your metal projects in
Yeah, metal
2008,
and wood. Yeah,
metal and wood,
yeah,
because you had taken the wood shop class, and when you were studying, you were pre-med, and so you had some exposure, but then you started learning more about metal, and just what an incredible support you received from that lady who wanted to
Yeah,
buy your who bought your table. I mean,
yeah,
that must have been just amazing, that the impact on what you did after that, and what how you thought of your work, and whether or not this was the path you were going to continue on. You know, given you were, as you just mentioned, you were discouraged from pursuing art as a career.
yeah.
So is your work now, or maybe from 2008 and now, is your work informed by certain concepts or themes from your background, or your mission? Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So, um, well, first and foremost, my work, as you shared in that statement at the start, I am really concerned about and want to educate and learn more about all the time, you know, our relationship with the natural world, right? And like the how to strike a balance, or how to grow in a way that's sustainable for our livelihood on this planet,
Yeah.
right? And um, so whether I'm working with natural materials, or the themes in my work are connected to that, um, very much so. I mean, as well as all sorts of things, um, yeah, from whether it's like the spirit world or mythology. Like my show that you had mentioned was really about, like, when I got into that and looked at that, um, it's really around, like, I want to create and tell the story of, like, the mythology that I want to see happening, as well as, like, what is it currently and what is the potential that exists, and how do we move towards that potential, which is a much more positive future, than the current, paradigm, the current relationship that we have to the earth and to each other. I mean, really, our relationship to ourselves is that is reflected in, and also that's how we relate to other people. That's how we relate to the planet. If I don't respect myself, why would I respect anyone else, or why would I care if I'm just trashing my environment?
Right,
Whether it's,
right. And your show in 2019, Neither Created Nor Destroyed, you featured five very large pieces. And this was an amazing show that brought together people of all ages and background. And your work really brought the community together in dialogue. There were piece, and maybe you can talk about those pieces. I do remember Drive. We were just talking about that earlier. Insight. There was The Assembled God, the very large piece. Sacrifice and blessing is, I really can't pick a favorite, but I do have a poster of blessing in my office.
awesome.
If you can talk about one or two of those, and talk to our listeners about first your inspiration for the concept,
Mhm.
and how you made that vision into a reality.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a journey for sure. Um, you know, as I said, I had the idea for the show, right, which was that which we call trash, the lowest of the low, that we don't know what to do with or don't want to deal with, is actually the divine, right? Because just like our subconscious mind, our unconscious, um, it's difficult to access, and many people don't want to go there, Um,
Yeah.
but that's where all the information for transformative change and evolution exist, right? We can transform ourselves through all of this. So, um, all the pieces in that show were made entirely from found, salvaged, reused, or donated materials. And, um, you know, as I was coming up with the concept for the show, like some of these pieces they just came right through. They came through maybe in different forms. Um, but I knew that I wanted to create things out of these materials that are mundane objects from our world. So one piece was a hand, um, and this piece was called Sacrifice, and it was made out of toothbrushes. And again, I knew that I wanted that. I saw these toothbrushes as bones, right? They're white. They're kind of about the size of like your hand or finger bones, the metacarpals and carpals, and they also, like, toothbrushes are one of those things that I feel a lot of people, we just don't even think about, right? We use them
And
and
throw them
then
away.
throw them away. Like there's not even a recycling symbol on a lot of them. And
Yeah.
so if you just think about like how many you in your lifetime have used and thrown out, and then multiply that by every person in the Western world for their entire lives, like it's an unbelievable number of pieces of plastic that are meant for a single usage that then just goes in the trash.
It's really sad to think of it that way.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so when uh, I had put a lot of thought towards this, and of course, there are companies out there that are doing great things, making toothbrushes out of bamboo and biodegradable bristles and all kinds of things.
Right.
For the most part, right, by and large, you go into a store, like you just see plastic toothbrushes. And so, like, my goal with that in creating that hand was, you know it it was to show really and inspire the youth, right? Like, of course, I want to share and inspire our peers, right?
Yes.
And everyone, but really for the youth to see, like, oh, here's something that, like, I was just, we were kind of born into this meme, into this idea that, like, this is how things operate. Like, they just is a stream. They just come in, I purchase them and consume them, and then they go here in the trash. But, like, here's another option. And just seeing that, just knowing that there's something else that could be done with that material, um, it's like, oh, well, maybe we can design things differently from the start. And maybe there's another way that these things can be used. And if I think about how else they can be used, now we can start designing them differently at the beginning of the design, so that we know, okay, after this finishes being a toothbrush, all you do is like snap the head off, and then this piece, goes here, and you can turn it into something else, whatever it is, right? Like, I'm I was creating art out of these things, and I'm not saying there's one correct path forward,
Right.
but just to have that inspiration and that spark of, like, oh, well, how else could this work?
It's not the end of the life cycle. Anybody who
Right.
looks at it, especially the youth, it really gets them into thinking about alternatives.
That's the idea. Yeah. And so, I mean, just specifically with that piece, its title was Sacrifice, right? And it represented both what are the ways of thinking that we need to sacrifice in ourselves, in our culture and society, in order to continue to move forward. And it also represented, like, the great sacrifice of life that would happen or will happen if we do not, right? We're all gonna be like we'll have plastic in our water supply or our air or whatever it is. Like we're going to turn into this thing that we just keep throwing in the ground. And, you know, so yeah, that's that one piece. I think I've probably talked a whole
Well,
bunch about
yeah,
that.
I mean, they were all just amazing. And, again, I can't, I don't have a favorite. I just love them all. But maybe if you want to talk about another piece from that um, collection, and I do want to include pictures of your pieces in the podcast, when
Yeah,
we publish, so that our
absolutely.
listeners can see. And also later on, you can invite them to connect with you via your website or whatever is the best way to connect with you.
Awesome.
And just go ahead and talk to us about another piece from that collection that really allowed people to stop and think about what they're doing in their everyday lives and how they can change, now.
Sure. Yeah. Um, well, I guess I'll just talk about the next piece. There was a piece called Drive, and that piece was made almost entirely out of uh, used tires, and it was an anatomical heart, and it was really big. It was like a 3 foot tall anatomical heart. Um, but everything in there was from basically the automotive industry, right? There was like a valve in there, excuse me, a valve and a clutch plate. Um, and to me, that was, again, it's one of these things like tires. We all ride around in a car or motorcycle or bicycle even, right? Like, and this material that we're on, for a lot of people almost every single day, like, when do we think about what happens to that material at the end of its when it's done? Like when we go and get our tires changed, when we get new tires, like what happens to tires? you know like, okay, I know just a little bit, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, some go and you can get retreaded, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But the in working with tires, one of the things that I learned very viscerally is, right, they have, you've heard of steel belting in a tire.
Yes.
Okay, so steel belted tires. What that means is that there's steel woven in like a mat through that rubber, right? The rubber is like molded around this woven mesh
Right.
of steel, which makes them very difficult to even cut through, right? Because you're cutting through steel. Um, but I mean, it made me really think, like, how would somebody even recycle this? Like, you'd have to get it hot enough that the rubber melts, right? You
Right.
get the melting temperature of rubber and not steel, just to remove the rubber from the metal. So, okay, and now you can use that, and you
And how much of it can you reuse
can
after that
exactly,
process?
exactly. I mean, I don't know how that all works, but in creating this piece, um, you know, it was also kind of signified, like, this is one of those things, like, everyone rides around on these. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're in a vehicle, if you're in public transit, whatever, you're going to be connected to this material, and everyone can recognize it. And the piece was called Drive. It represented our drives and our motivations, and the drives and motivations that have led us to this black heart. And you know but at the center of it was a piece of oak trunk,
Wow.
so oak tree trunk. And that that to me, the piece represented to me that with a, a pure heart or positive intention, you can make changes. You can make these positive changes, even in material as mundane as tires, right? As mundane and ubiquitous as the automotive industry, right? There are, like, how can we begin thinking differently about these things? And again, like, that's one of the cool parts about art, right? Like, you focus on anything. That my painting mentor always used to say that. It's like, you can focus on anything. If you do that long enough, it will become interesting. And, to me, it's like just learning the little bit more that I did about tires. And I'm actually, you know, I still have a lot of tires. I really like that material. I think it's a
From the
very,
project,
yeah,
some leftovers from the project.
yeah. And I actually, there's like a series that I'm working on that utilizes these tires. Um, and you start working with something, you start thinking about it more and more, and it really helps me to think like, oh, what else can I do, and what would be a better way of designing. And like, I'm not a materials scientist, I'm not a tire designer, right? But for those youth, or those people who are out there who will become that or are in those positions now,
Right. You're
it's like,
planting seeds.
that's that's the
They're
idea.
seeing your work and they're inspired by your work, and in their own work and industries, they can make other things happen. And I can actually, looking at that at Drive, I can definitely see your science background.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
It's the anatomical heart and just the precision. And we've had some friends went to the show who are in medicine, and they were just so impressed. They're examining
Oh wow,
the
nice.
ventricles, and said, "Wow,
Wow.
this artist has some science background."
Yeah, I had my physiology book out for sure as I was creating that.
Yes, that was an incredible piece. And going back to the idea of the community, and especially the youth, looking at that piece and being inspired to go out into the world and see how they can use their own talent and skills to make something happen for them in their irrespective industries. And earlier we talked about the project you did in Alaska, and the commute and how the community responded to that.
Mhm.
Well, I want to ask you how the community responded to that big project, which to date is your biggest project,
Yeah.
the fence that went around the park. What has changed in that community, if any, since you built that fence?
Um, well, it's a new, it's the town is very small where we are, right? We're at the end of a 66-mile dirt road. It's like, there's Main Street, there's this street, there's this street, and this street, and that's the town, right? And as far as like streets in town go, then it takes a while to get to anyone's residence outside of that. And so this piece is on Main Street. It's literally like, as you're coming into town, one of the first things that you see. So it's a new landmark in that town. And it was a really, it was such an incredible experience in so many ways. Um, and I guess one of the things that was frightening about it, right, is that I had nowhere to hide, right? Like, if it didn't turn out well, like it wasn't
They know
like
where
there
to
was,
find you.
yeah, nobody else was responsible for that. they're like, oh yeah, we know who built that thing. And so, I wanted to make something that, was just honest and true to myself and true to the spirit of that town as I had lived it and understood it. And um, working with it, like the actual history, the physical history of the town itself, um, was it was just so incredible. You're looking at and working with these materials that are 100 years old or 100 plus years old, and really part of this different time in that place. And it was so fun. Like it was such a great challenge, but to be able to tell a story with that also. And so there's like many different stories within it, right? It was built kind of in panels, um, and some of the panels themselves have a story, um, and overall it has its own kind of narrative. But yeah, it was, it felt really uh, rewarding, even though it's not why I make work. Um, but it was really nice that the overwhelming response to this piece was a positive one. And it was like, we're happy this is in this place where we live. Like we're proud of this new landmark. And it's it's one of those things that's interesting. Like, visitors come through and they take pictures of it every year, every summer. And there was much more that was supposed to happen in that project. I was supposed to be on that project for 4 years, and I was on it for just 2. So, I'm uh, hoping that as things change over there, like I'll be able to go back and kind of complete what was started.
Oh, I see. That's a huge commitment to be commissioned for a project that would have lasted 4 years. And how do
Yeah.
you make a decision on something like that when you might consider working on other, ongoing projects in the Bay Area, and with your schedule very busy with your work, and you also have your own shop, and you also teach at the Crucible, when you did um, accept that invitation, and even though it only took 2 out of the 4 years, what were some of the things that you thought about in deciding to accept it?
Well, basically, what it meant, I just saw it as such an incredible opportunity, right? Like that to me was one of those opportunities that really comes by once or only a few times in a lifetime, right? I was asked to create something of value to bring a community that I love together,
It's a huge
right?
honor. Yeah.
In physical proximity, in dialogue, um, and so I knew I was going to do it when it came up. I was like, I have to do this. Um, and I was able to do it at the time, right? I was single and, didn't like, didn't have an attachment to being in the Bay Area for an extended length of time. Um, so what it meant was like everything that I owned went into storage. And so I just planned for that. And, there was a series, like between those 2 years, between those 2 summers, I actually had another artist residency um, in San Diego. And so I went kind of from Alaska just briefly into the Bay, and then I was down in San Diego. And then same
Wow.
thing, briefly back here on the way back up. So, um, I just had to become like mobile ninja at like setting up shops, um, wherever I was and being functional, so yeah, I was just so happy to do that project, and I was really proud of what we accomplished. Um, and yeah, I mean, I still go back to that town. Like it's a place I'll go to for the rest of my life. I love it up there, and I just did a project up there this past summer, so um, I hope that all continues.
It's like your
But
second home. You did another project this summer and you anticipate coming back perhaps to continue what you started working on, the 4-year project. I mean, you do have that fence, and you said it was supposed to be more involved than the fence surrounding the park.
yeah,
So that's incredible, and definitely that decision to accept that invitation really opened more doors for you. And I want to know, as an artist, as you navigate through this field and think about how to plan, if you can, to the extent that you can plan, think about what projects you're willing to take on, and maybe your ongoing projects now, as you work through these exciting projects, and maybe sometimes some challenges that may affect what you're working on. Do you have your source? What is your source of inspiration or guiding principle to keep you motivated
yeah,
in
yeah.
and succeed in your field?
Thank you. Um, yeah, well, it's a couple things, right? I look for inspiration all over the place, definitely in nature and like being out in it, whether I'm surfing or um, hiking, camping, whatever it is, going different places.
And maybe snowboarding. I mean, it's the
Snowboarding, yeah,
season.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah, yeah. Uh, and and of course, I'm always looking at other artists who inspire me, or returning to artists who just always seem to inspire me. Um, and then, I also, one of the things that really helps me stay motivated through all the challenges, because it's so incredibly challenging um, to choose to be an artist and do that full time, um, is I have a Buddhist practice, and I chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo every day and every night. And that really, um, it helps me to stay focused. It helps me to stay motivated. It helps me to um, like gain awareness of like what is the lens that I'm not looking at this problem from, and how do I achieve that. And it also, I'm also like continue to find inspiration and creativity um, from and through that, and through helping other people.
And so, what did Namyoho Renge Kyo do for you specifically as an artist?
uh well, it basically, I had been an artist for 7 years before I met the practice, or it met me, however it all works. And I had been a classic like starving artist. I was just uh, I was making work and I enjoyed that, but I was just like, I was not making money. I wasn't interested in any of that. I'd kind of bought into an idea, a romanticized idea of being an artist who was like gained inspiration and creativity from just struggling, even when I didn't need to struggle, you know. And and really, what was going on was I was waiting for someone or something outside of myself to like find me. I was like, oh yeah, that
Yeah.
was the other romanticized idea I had. Like, oh yeah, someone's just gonna like see my work and be like, oh, dude, you're a genius. Let's like, I just want to give you money, like make things forever for
Why
us.
not? Yeah, that's
And
a reasonable expectation,
yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah.
Well, it still could happen, but the
Yeah.
thing is, like, right, like we create our own luck, right? We
Right.
create those opportunities. So um, when I started chanting, one of the first things that was shared with me is that it's like, if you think the problem or the answer is outside of yourself, you're inherently going to be let down because both exist right here. And so I was like, well, this is up to me. Like, what if this is what I want and this is what I'm going to do and I'm committed to doing, how do I do this and become successful? Like, I need to be able to take care of myself. And so, I really started stepping up and stepping into things. And I had a newfound, they say when you chant, you gain wisdom, courage, and compassion. And I had, you know,
Absolutely.
um, a newfound courage to step into projects that in the past I very well may not have done, because it's like, no, I'm not ready for that yet. Like, I'm not at that level. I don't know how to do that. I've never done that before. Any of those things where instead it was like, okay, this is a new challenge. It's showing up, but like, wow, this is going to be a sweet project, and let's figure out how to do it. Um, and I guess the wisdom to just really start seeing those, like the awareness of projects that had been right in front of me for years that I had never seen as a viable option. It's like, oh, dude, I can just ask, you know, maybe they need a project done. And um, so, and then, compassion that what I was doing would truly reconnect in with like why I feel I'm here, right? And what I feel is my greatest gift to share that will actually benefit humanity and benefit culture and people, future generations, and our planet. And so it chanting helped me in those ways in that part of my in my artistic career. It also helped in my family life and many other aspects of my life. Um, and when you're in a good place, then you can actually like do your thing in the best way, right? So
Absolutely.
um, when I'm feeling free, when I'm feeling freedom, and so that helps every day.
Yeah, and that's very much consistent with the concept of ikigai, where you're doing something that you love and that you're absolutely good at. It's that your talent and your passion converge in such a way that you are able to share with the world something that the world really needs,
Mm-hmm.
and it's amazing. And for our listeners who are excited to know more about you, what should they expect to see from you in 2021?
Uh, well, 2021 has already been a very interesting year. I moved from my big shop into a much smaller shop, and I'm actually working full time with a sculpture uh, production studio. Um, and so there's going to be a little bit of recalibration because I'm still getting my shop dialed, but I'm super excited because now I'm in my shop. I'm only working on art and sculpture as opposed to building functional and design things. Um, railings, doors, gates, custom furniture, all that stuff. So, I I have a number of different series that I'm exploring right now, um, and and one of the materials that we hadn't talked about that I've worked with in the past um, is these confiscated weapons that I got from the district attorney's office of Alameda County. And so I'm definitely looking at some pieces, working with that material, and again working with the tires, used tires.
That's great, because you did work with those confiscated weapons in the past, in the Art of Peace initiative. I think you called it Seeds of Hope. For
Yeah,
those listeners who may not know about it, would you like to share a little bit more about what that project was about?
sure. And I wish I had photos for each one of these, right? Because a photo
Absolutely.
really is 1,000 of my words. So
Yes.
um, yeah, that was a piece for the show was called The Art of Peace, Alameda County. And there were 7 artists who won a call for art to make work out of these confiscated weapons. And so the piece that I made, right, was called Seeds of Hope. It was a flower. And again, it really represents, I was looking at like what represents transformation. What are one of these things? Like many things represent transformation, but to me, um, that flower that was just open, and it has this stamen and pistil, right? It's like it's putting new seeds out into the world and literally changing these tools of destruction, these tools of death that were all taken like from crime scenes or like from court action. So it was
Yeah.
like they weren't just like gun buybacks or people who were like hunting
Absolutely.
rifles. These are like actually used with intent to injure someone. And how to take those and transform them into something that inspires change, inspires hope. And so that piece was really really amazing to work with that material, and just it was really a beautiful thing just to even think about uh, how to embody this transformation, and again inspire others.
Thank you for sharing that. And if anybody, I definitely am looking forward to your next projects. I know you will keep me informed.
Yeah, well,
And if anyone wants to reach you, what is the best way to do that?
um, so I'm on Instagram uh, at Enright Sculpture, and my website is enrightsculpture.com. And right now, the best way, if you want to email me, my email is Brian at 12 sticks, the number 12, and then sticks.com.
Excellent. And we'll also include your information in our show notes.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Brian.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mika. This is awesome.
Thank you for listening. Stories of Ikigai is brought to you by MS Domingo Law Group.